Hey, I'm back.
Hey, Ben. Yeah.
Okay,
So, yeah, I don't know what happened, but something went wrong. But
that's
I think
okay.
we're
That's
back.
okay.
That's good. That's
That's
good.
fine.
So now, yeah. So we were talking about advisors speaking.
Right, right. So what I was saying was that it's okay to change areas. Many of us do that. I change it myself, and so if you want to explain that, in your statement of purpose, for example, that you did your research in a particular area, but your real research interests lie in X, Y, Z. That's perfectly fine. As long as that will tell the advisor that basically they're going to look at your previous research experience as proof that you can do good research, and that's all it is. You show that you can
Sure.
do good work, and then whatever area that you want to go into the future, that's fine. That's a different question. Yeah.
Very nice. Very nice. Sure. So another thing that students get always worried or wondering, Ben, is the so I speak to my friends. Because when I'm applying, I'm always in this mode of just checking out what has happened and everything. Sometimes it's all students show up to me and then ask that, oh, there's a student who applied to, let's say, top tier schools, right? They got in there, but they applied to a lower tier school. They did not get in there. What do you think would have gone? Right? So they apply to CMU,
Yeah.
blah 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 places. They get in there, but they apply to a lower tier schools. They get like a reject. What's going on? What do you think is going on in this
That
situation?
happens a lot. That's why I tell students not to think that there's this perfect correlation between selectivity and their chances. It is not
Mm-hmm.
at all correlated that way. So oftentimes what happens is you think of it this way. You're not really okay. So in some schools you're applying to be a pool of general PhD admits. So a lot of some I don't want to say how many. I'm not quite sure how many, but some schools will basically say we're going to admit 30 students and we're going to look for these students to be of a certain caliber, and then we don't care so much about
Mm-hmm.
the area. But most
Mm-hmm.
schools will, in fact, you know, cut it down a little bit and be like, okay, yes, we want 35 or 40 or whatever many students, but in that mix, we want this many people, roughly speaking, for machine learning, this many for systems and networking, this many for security, and so on. So,
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes it really depends on, if they're particularly for smaller schools, right? This will matter quite a bit. This will change a lot from year to year. You might have a smaller school with two people in security, for example, and maybe last year they took in too many students, and so this year they're not looking for anyone at all. So if you apply and you say, this is my backup school and I'm wanting to work in security, and you don't get in, oftentimes it's because the faculty in that area that particular year just have no slots. And that's very hard to tell from year to year. That
Mm-hmm.
faculty don't generally advertise it very much. You can try to ask them beforehand, send them an email and say, are you, recruiting for students? If they don't reply or they say, no, I'm sorry, we've got too many from last year, that's probably a good indicator that, your chances are going to be low, even if you are a highly qualified applicant. So that might be worthwhile doing earlier. But yeah, it's not at all, a smooth probability distribution. It's very granular and it's sometimes unexpected.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And do you think that this correlation not being there happens for masters admissions also? Because your answer was mostly towards the
Right.
PhD, but does that
Right.
happen for a master's program also?
I think for masters, the correlation may be a little bit stronger in the sense
Mm-hmm.
that because master slots for a master's program will generally be a bit more fluid, right? Because if you
Mm-hmm.
think about it, from what I always advise students to do is to think about the faculty's perspective, right? Think about what kind of things they're trying to optimize for. So for a master's program, you know, for faculty, master's students are lower risk because they don't have to invest as much in terms of
Mm-hmm.
time and energy and funding. And
Mm-hmm.
so, it matters a little bit less in terms of which precise students they get. And so they're more willing to, be a little bit more fluid in terms of research area and specifics.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, generally speaking, the pool is bigger, and so it's harder to distinguish yourself in a master's applicant pool. Trade-offs. Yeah.
So generally, I mean, how is this master's admissions done? See, PhD admission is clear, so we will understand that apply the small pool of applications. Faculty have more time to spend because they have to put in more risk, they have to fund all that. But generally, what happens in master's applications? Apply, what goes on? Just quickly, and then I'll take, there are 2-3 other questions on the chat, so we'll take that.
Yeah. Just very quickly. I mean, generally speaking, they are done after the PhD admissions process is done. And so, for example, depending on department, of course, it varies a bit. But generally speaking, we try to get PhD admissions decisions mostly sort of done by early to mid-February. And then once we're done with that, then we can turn our attention to the master's pool. And that process is usually much faster because oftentimes, the question is, if you make a single mistake in a master's program, it's okay. It's not going to really hurt your program. If you make a mistake in the PhD pool, it's, they're there with you for 5-6 years. The impact on the program is bigger. So you spend a little bit less time on the master's. Yeah.
Okay. Good. So let's take some questions, Ben. This is so the question is, if I have more of teaching experience, how does that go in my application? Meaning less of research. I think specific question is also right. What if a person is having teaching experience in private university, which probably happens, right? I finish my undergrad, I have a master's degree, I get into some college to teach, and then I want to do my PhD. How does that go?
So, I'm going to tell you the truth, which is that, unfortunately, for better or for worse, teaching experience doesn't help you a whole lot. And it is generally, it's generally.
Sorry. No, we are here to hear your honest opinion, right? That's the reason why we're speaking.
Right.
I know what is written, right?
Right, exactly. So, I mean, many people complain about the fact that the academic pipeline doesn't produce good teachers necessarily, right? So we are focused on producing good researchers, but many times we don't focus much on teaching. So the teaching, the role of teaching throughout the whole process is not as heavy. So if you say, I'm a great teacher, I have this experience, it helps. It certainly is a plus. But, ultimately, I don't think it'll have a big impact on your research application. I don't know of any students who are going to be admitted because, I'm not sure whether he or she will make it through the PhD, but it looks like they're a great teacher. Let's do that. That argument will probably not fly. Yeah,
sure. And the next one is, what is the correct time to apply for PhD? I think correct time is the word that Asha is single. Manikant, I hope you got the answer that for the question that you asked. But Asha is single is asking, what is the correct time to apply for PhD? For instance, should I consider having some industry experience? So this is a general thing that in India, right? We finish undergrad, and then we are not sure whether we are yet cut out for PhD. Should I go take a 2 year or 2-3 years of work experience? Actually speaking, in India, then there's Microsoft and other organizations have designed their, so to say, job opportunities around this. They call it a research fellow and all that. 2 year, 3 year time period, and then they get this good LORs. And then actually some students are doing phenomenally well who are going through this program. So leave this program, but generally industry experience, how does this help?
Right. So there's a lot of questions around these lines, right? So I think my general comment is that, I don't know that it helps that much. I think it depends on the industrial opportunity. If it is something that, has a lot of focus, has a lot of overlap with research, then it will for sure help. So if it's Microsoft Research or something similar to that, absolutely, that's very helpful. But many places, I think, even sometimes at Google and Facebook, some of these really top-end, experiences, they're so big that you go there, you're going to basically be, doing software engineering. And so in that sense, it may be a slight negative because the faculty will look at you and say, well, okay, so, they're clearly great engineers, but in doing the engineering job, we understand that you sort of lose touch with your academics a little bit. You've forgotten some of the, data structures or algorithms or theory or other pieces that, you don't use that much in an engineering role. And so it actually can hurt you a little bit. So I think it really depends on the opportunity. If it's a good opportunity, then by all means, go for it. But I generally advise students to try to apply right after, because I think that's when everything is fresh.
Okay.
Also, another reason is that when you go into industry, you get used to a certain lifestyle, and then coming back to the grad student lifestyle, it's going to be difficult, particularly in the U.S. I think in India as well. Some of these places really pay you well, and once you get a nice social circle, you get a lifestyle going, it's going to be difficult to imagine going back to, the standard classes and, working on weekends and those kind of things. So.
Right. So another question that's common among students in India is then that about writing to professors before applying, right? Meaning, how much does cold emailing work? What would be your strategy if you were to suggest students from India today?
You know, I get a lot of emails. I think in general, it's good. It's fine to do. I think it doesn't necessarily hurt you. You just need to calibrate your expectations. Some faculty, particularly at some very well-known faculty, they get lots and lots of emails. So they, for sure, I think everybody reads them. We all read all these emails. The question is, are you going to get a reply? It's not quite clear. Sometimes, in general, if they reply, it means that there's real interest, because we're all so busy that we're not going to reply if there's not strong interest. But if we reply and say, I'm sorry, we can't do it, then that's also honest. But I think, if we don't reply, many times it is an indication that maybe we're not interested, maybe we're not hiring this year, maybe the fit isn't great. Or in some cases, it just may be we're out of time and we can't handle all the email. So I would say it's okay to try, but don't expect too much. And the answer, if you get a positive answer, that's great. But if you get a negative answer, don't think, this is it. This is for sure. I had no chance, and I'm going to stop trying. Just understand that a lot of times it's just logistics, and people don't have enough time to answer all the emails they'd like to. So.
Yeah. Because I've had people, at least in the US, tell me, right? They, particularly from India, students write a lot of these emails. I mean, sometimes they're not even connected, right? They're writing to you for, let's take a biometrics or some other area which you don't work on, saying that I'm interested in working algorithms and stuff like that. I mean, it's completely irrelevant.
Yeah, so I think it definitely helps if you're going to write such an email to really, if you're really interested in the faculty member, read a couple papers, comment on the research. That's how you get attention, right? If I see someone make an actual technical comment on one of my papers, for sure I'll be like, oh, at least they've done their homework. This is not a template email that gets my name wrong or calls me ma'am or says, I know I love your research in hardware and I want to work with you. Those will get deleted very quickly. So
yeah. Okay, so Dheeraj has one question about how do I estimate my chances of getting into a particular university. Universities don't typically reveal acceptance rates for graduate admissions like they do for undergrad.
Boy, that's a good question. It's hard. What I would do is I would say, look at, try to look at which students have gotten accepted in recent past, and then try to dig up their record, right? So a lot of students, particularly students who've been around in the PhD for a couple of years, they will always have their CV online, right? So one thing that I sometimes do is, in order to gauge the selectivity of a particular department, I'll say, hey, I know so-and-so in a particular department, and I'll just go look at their students. And I'll dig in their student CVs, and very quickly I'll see, this is a student from so-and-so school, which, I view very highly, and then they mentioned they have a really high GPA in their college, so then I think, okay, their selectivity is probably pretty high. Whereas if I see some students who are from, okay, middle tier schools and maybe not such a strong GPA, then I'll sort of get a better sense of where their selectivity is. So I think looking at that is probably the only way to really get an accurate sense. Like they said, they don't, nobody publishes acceptance rates, and oftentimes it varies significantly. So the best way to do it is to look at students um, who are students of the faculty that you're interested in, or at least in that area. So a lot of times it really varies by research area, so that will matter.
Yeah. Sure. So Vaibhav asked a question, but Vaibhav, I'll suggest you to listen to the earlier part of the video. Your question, we took it earlier, so I'll request you to listen to that part of the video. So any other thoughts? So Ben, how much? So it's about 1 minute left for the time. 10:15 we agreed on.
Sure.
How much minutes are you left with? Do you have time, or should we stop in 1 minute?
I have time.
So that I'll ask.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
We can.
No, I'll let
we
people
can
who are
go
listening
beyond. I'm fine.
Yeah. No, I'll let people who are listening to give them some chance to ask questions if they have any.
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, we can go well beyond this. I'm fine, and this is a rare opportunity, so I'm happy to stay around for a little bit longer.
Yeah. So I think this is a rare opportunity for us also to get people like you to come and share.
They can wait.
Thoughts, right?
Yeah. Sorry. Go
ahead. Ben, I'm going to go to some of the questions that I've been collating. I think you saw I sent you when I made the draft of this website saying I'm doing this. I'm going to pick 1 or 2 questions from there, which sometimes is very frequently asked, which is the number of LORs to get. Right, so this question of I did my internship in an industry. Should I get 2 academic versus 1 industry? What's the right combination, or how should I go about doing it?
I think it as in all these things, it depends on the specifics. I would say it doesn't hurt to get more. As a committee, we can scan through letters pretty quickly. So if there is a letter from someone who has minimal content, you certainly want to be able to, have someone else to offset that. So, I think it's fine to ask for more. And, as a letter writer, it doesn't hurt them because they're basically writing a single letter. They rarely customize it for the department. So it's just one PDF they can send out to more places. So I think the incremental cost for a letter writer is fairly low. So I think it's okay to ask for more. Don't go crazy, but adding a couple more letters doesn't hurt, I think.
Yeah. So, but how many letters do admissions committee look at? So let's take.
We look at all of them. We try to look at all of them. So, if there are 5 letters, if there are 6 letters, we'll look through all of them. Particularly if some of them are lengthy and detailed, it's very easy to spot, and then we'll probably pay more attention to those. But yeah, you want to make sure that you get enough coverage from people who really know you, right? So yeah, the more the better in general. I think.
Because I thought that the number of letters was limited because students are always doing a thing of PK. Should I take your letter? I'm managing this. And things like that. So I was under the impression that it was limited to 3. I think 3 was the number that people kept telling me. But it's good to know that you look at all of them.
Yeah, I think the faculty who really care will look at all of them. I think some people who really want to quickly skim will maybe look at a subset. Yeah. But if you get more, then they'll look at a subset. It doesn't necessarily hurt you. But I think if you limit yourself to 3 and one of them comes in with a weak letter or maybe a very short letter, then that hurts you. So I would rather, if I'm an applicant, I would rather minimize the chances of that happening.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So another thing is common there because there is 4 pieces of this admission. One of the important part is SOP, right? So what are your suggestions on meaning getting the real attention of the faculty to my application?
Right. I think, I think this was one of the first things I answered on Quora way back in the, 5-6 years ago, or how many years it's been. I think the thing to do is to really get concrete, more technical details, the better. So write things that really help the admissions committee understand the background of your research and the circumstances of the department and what kind of resources you have and what you've done, what have you made out of those resources. So, less stories about how you grew up loving computers. We don't care, right? More stories about, okay, my department has such and such resources. I proactively thought out, these faculty, certain projects fail, certain projects work. What did you do when projects fail? What did you do, when you had certain challenges? Those things are very useful. Try to provide that level of real detailed information and less of the general, I love AI, et cetera, stuff.
Mm-hmm. Good. Yeah. So I think that's very clear, I guess, in terms of because I think when we look at so to say statements now for PhD admissions, the first paragraph is all about how they love computers. Right? They started using it when they were in 7th standard, and now people write to me, at least they say that, oh, I've been on Facebook from my 6th standard, so social networks is the area that I should work on.
Right.
So
yeah, I would actually prefer students who don't do that, right? So if you say, the students who come in and say, well, I love Facebook, this is why I want to work on social media, I think, well, that's not a great reason, because 2 years later you may love something else, and then where did your research interests lie? So hopefully it's based on something a little bit deeper, but yeah.
Right. Yeah. So let's see if there are any questions. How do I estimate? What's the professor? Yeah, I think we're taking these questions well. Yeah, so another one also sometimes, particularly from India, I guess, you will see this thing about students only writing the, so to say, the LORs itself, or helping the faculty write LOR. This is some things that you would have seen in the admissions committee. So how does, so to say, admissions committee react to it? Meaning this as a faculty also I would like to know, right? Meaning you look at applications, you're kind of saying, oh, these institutes should be kind of not look at the applications coming, because it may hurt the future students, right? Because of one student doing that, you may start seeing that institute in a different note.
Yeah. So I think this is a practice that Chinese students used to do quite a bit.
Okay.
And to be honest, it hurts everybody because a lot of times, one of the key things that graduate admission committees rely on is calibration for letter writers, right? So if I know that, PK writes letters a certain way, then I can, put a certain way behind what he says. And certain faculty tend to be overly positive. And I have a list of those kind of faculty who write letters, and I have to think very hard, every year he says that this is the best student he's ever seen. So I don't know. So when students take over the writing, that, really hurts that calibration. And more importantly, we don't know for future letters from that writer, do we, is this something that's legitimate? This is what the faculty thinks, or this is just what the student says? So that really is bad. If we see that, then not only do we essentially think that letter is not useful at all, because students, they're not going to say bad things about themselves. And I think not only is it bad for that particular applicant, but it's also going to hurt that faculty's credibility, because now we say, well, future years, we've seen this faculty let students take over the letter writing, and how much are we going to trust his or her future letters down the road?
Yeah.
So I think most Chinese schools have stopped it. They understand how it actually hurts everybody, so they've stopped it. Hopefully, people stop this practice in general. It is not useful to anybody, I think.
Right. Yeah. Okay, there are a few questions there. Let's just do that, and then we can stop. So, is the expectations generally high for someone who took an experience to do a relevant research after master's? So, I think this is very common, at least now in the institutes like IIIT, Hyderabad, and Delhi, which is that people are finishing undergrad, and then they spend a year or two with the faculty, just try to do something interesting. At least 2 years, right? Because when they graduate immediately that year, they can't produce anything, because by that time December comes, it's only 6 months. So they essentially spend 1.5 years and then apply. So this is very common now in India, at least people who want to go to these top good schools. So how much difference is it making?
You mean taking some of the extra time to do research before they apply?
Yeah.
I think that helps. I think it certainly helps us better understand how much research potential there is.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that you don't want to rely too much on it. If you're really
Mm-hmm.
hoping that your entire application is going to go or go no go because of that, that's a little bit too much pressure. Some of these experiences will pan out, but all research has risk, and so some things will fail. And if you spend 2 years and that doesn't quite work out, it doesn't look great on an application. So then you have to explain, okay, why didn't this work out? And hopefully you still learn enough new things to help you for the PhD. So in general, I think it helps the admissions committee. But from a perspective of a student, I think there is some risk, right? You want to make sure that 18 months or a year and a half or whatever it really is useful to you. It helps you instead of hurting you. Like I said, like I said earlier, we calibrate expectations based on how much time you've had to do legitimate research. So those people who've done a master's, who've done real extended research, the expectation is, okay, now you've had time to do real research. Show us what you've done, as opposed to a bachelor where we say we understand the resources or the timing has been it's very constrained, so we're not going to expect too much. So it's pros and cons. It's a little bit more risk.
Okay. So Dheeraj has it looks like Dheeraj has a lot of questions to Ben, I guess. It's the second or the third one, I guess. How much of an advantage is to have LORs, this question is, to have LORs from various sources as compared to having LORs from one university where I graduate from? Meaning, I get 3 LORs, I get all of them from my teachers' courses that I've taken. That's it. That's all I have.
I think it matters less about the institution, more about how they know you. If you get all your letters from faculty who are the same, who have the same relationship to you, let's say they're all professors that you've taken a class in, they're all going to say about the same thing. Oh, so and so got this grade in my class, and that's about it. That's less useful. But on the other hand, how many sources can you have? Most people get most of their letters from their home institution. So hopefully some of those letters will be stronger. Some of them will be more in depth because they know you better. So if you have, you want at least a couple from the academic institution to explain, this is so-and-so and they did great in my class and they have research potential. I've talked to them outside of classes, etc. And then, if you have a letter or two from other areas, whether it's an internship or an industry person, that can be useful. But you have to understand that a lot of times it is easier for us to calibrate letters from academics because we think the same way. So there are expectations. We know how to adjust what they say. But in industry, it's harder because there's so much more variance. So a smaller company may say, this is the best person I've ever seen in my 30 years. But a big company can say, oh, we get students like her every year, so no big deal. So that variance is harder to gauge. We value different viewpoints, but the academics are easier to translate for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very, very appropriate. Yeah. So actually, there's another question by Shreya Sangvi, which is also an interesting question, given the institutes like IITs, IITs, where at least these programming competitions are. So how much value is that? And in master's admission, the question is relevant to master's admission. So ACM, ICPC competition. Now there's many hackathons in India that goes on. So how would you react to that?
I think those are very useful. I think it's not like we can expect everybody to do it, but certainly what it demonstrates is that it shows that for that particular applicant, they have strong programming skills. And that's something that, applications in a way are all about normalization. So a lot of things are difficult to normalize. Classes, what materials they teach, how much coding do they do? That's very so much. But these kind of things are standard in the sense that they are largely consistent across different countries and schools. So if you do something like ICPC or one of these ACM competitions and you get to a certain level, then at minimum, we know that there's some assurance that your system building ability or your coding ability is really good, right? And that's very useful information. You don't have to win the gold medal. I mean, if you do, that's fantastic. That helps a lot. But just being at that level of something, it says to us that, okay, you know how to code, and that's not going to be something that we have to really stress over or worry about. So that's useful information to have. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I hope, Shreyas, you got the answer. Vineet Hariharan, for PhD admissions, what type of research experience are the institutes looking for? Vineet, I think Ben answered this some time back about what kind of research experience. You should probably listen to that part of the conversation. Vineet, I think regarding this course, I think Ben's answer was it does not matter much. I think Ben, if you remember, one of the questions was what is the difference between 320, 325, 330? Is that making any difference for master's admission? I think your reaction was, if I remember correctly, not that much.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Any other questions from people listening to this? Or Ben, do you have anything other general thoughts, given that you've had these kind of questions? So one popular question. I know you've answered this on Quora, but this is a question about these brands from India, right? IITs, triple IITs. Meaning, am I disadvantaged being in, so to say, a third-tier private engineering college, or so to say, triple IITs compared to IITs? What do you look for?
This is a great question. So I think. First off, I think what's been happening in the U.S. is that regardless of what school, what university we're at, we all see a drop in applicants from India. Okay, so I know some people in India some students think that it's getting harder and harder. I think it's the opposite. The pool is shrinking for us, and so it depends. So some of the schools have the luxury. I think literally, if you look at Berkeley, MIT, Stanford, and CMU, they probably do this thing where they say, we can apply very broad filters because we get so many good applicants. But I think even they, in recent years, for the Indian pool, it's gotten to the point where they can't just say, we're only going to look at IIT, right? But certainly for the rest of us, anything beyond the top four, everybody's looking for good students from India, and we're past the point of only looking at IIT. We understand IITs are good, but we understand IITs have their own limitations. They're less research oriented, and they're very different. So I think most schools understand that beyond the IITs, there's PSIT, there's NITs, there's triple IT, Delhi and elsewhere. So I think people are open to understanding more about the different types of schools, and especially if as a faculty member you've actually paid attention to try to understand what the Indian schools are like, then you understand this much better. I think this is also a function of how much the grad admission committee cares and to do their homework. The more that they do their homework, the more obvious it is that there are different types of schools, and so. One of my former students, Krishna Wilson, he went on a physical trip to India, and he visited, PK and other people, and so I got secondhand information from him, but it was also very good. So it's almost as good as going. But I understand a lot about the different schools, and so hopefully, I think most universities now understand that there are different types of schools, and in many cases, it is not just about the IITs. And we got so many applicants from IITs. So few applicants from IITs that it almost doesn't matter anyway, that we're largely looking at other schools that have strong research goals. And so, just case in point, I think PK, you've had a fantastic record of getting students into the top programs because of the fact that people understand that your program really focuses on research. And so, it's not about ranking, it's about there are so many good students in India. You don't need the 0.00001, ridiculous, head of the curve, because there is no difference between that person and the person ranked, 100 spots later. There are so many good students, and they're all well beyond the bar. So it is much more advantageous for us to get someone who is better trained in research than someone who got, one small part more correct on the national exam. So
yeah. Yeah, Christo and Alan Mislaw both visited, and it was fun actually having
that's
all
right.
the interactions and touring and stuff like that. Yeah. A couple of questions and then we'll stop. I think these are repeated questions, but let's see. Shreya Sangvi is asking research internship of 2 months at a government R&D institute. How helpful that would be for masters. I think my Shreya, it's my quick answer, not to disturb Ben, is I think he has answered this, right? I think it all depends on what you get out of it. I think wherever it is, what you get out of the internship, and that's what is going to matter, I guess. Are research internships considered to add great value to a student's applications? I think this was also answered. That it's probably connected to the Dheeraj, it's probably connected to Shreya's question and earlier discussions also, that it definitely matters, I guess. I'm going to give Ben the ones that we have not yet looked at. So Vineet is coming back and saying, I meant between conference publications, journal publications are like working with a professor in the same research field. Okay, so this is going back to the question, Ben, about research work done before applying, and what type of research level, right? Conference publication versus journal publications. Meaning, how much does that matter?
Well, I mean, in CS, the journal publications take so long, right? So in most cases, by the time that you've applied, your journal publication isn't out yet. So I think targeting conferences helps your applications more, because there's a higher probability of it actually coming out before you apply. Submitted papers, they mean almost nothing, because anybody can submit, and there's no validation from the review committee, so we don't know how good a paper is. And it's very difficult for us, for example, to literally look through all those papers themselves, right? Particularly if we're outside of that area, it's hard to judge. So, so I think getting a paper in is more important than it's a conference or versus a journal. So yeah, I think timing, that would make conferences much more attractive.
Oh, interesting. Because I've heard views, I think faculty in India have actually given sometimes views to me that these days admissions, at least in the US, have started looking at even submitted at, let's take IMC and the archive link, and that also is adding value because that application is standing out now. Because I think in US and in Europe also, I know that now the admissions, almost all admissions have started doing interviews. Even master student admissions, I've gotten some of my students interviews. So which means if you get to the interview level, all these guys can do well, right? Because if they've submitted to an IMC, the faculty must have spent time, the student must have spent time. So it looks to me that your answer is that no, it really matters only when it is accepted. But there's also this view of submission may itself get me an interview chance.
Right. So submissions certainly matter. Submissions basically say that you've put in substantial work and it's actually produced something that at least by the faculty, filter is good enough for publication. That's one level. Getting actual acceptance is a different level, right? And so sometimes,
absolutely.
Oftentimes we'll look at a particular deadline that maybe the notification deadline for a conference. If I know about it, then I will go online and check to see did that paper actually get in. Because especially if I'm not in that space, knowing whether that paper actually got in or not is another form of external validation that I look for. So it's different levels, but
I've seen students submit or send this revised information also, right? They submit the www paper, which is in October, November, and then they get the notification in January, February. Still the notification or the admissions, the results have not come. They'll email or they'll fill some form and tell them that, oh, I got a www paper or something.
Right. So if you get a notified acceptance, then by all means send an email and tell the grad admissions people to update your folder. That's helpful.
Right. Okay. Do industry internships add value to students' applications, or should the student only focus on research to get into a good university?
I'm sorry.
So industry, meaning does industry internship matter compared to an academic research internship?
I think it can help. Again, it depends on which industry and which companies. So the more the companies have to do with research, the more high profile they are, the higher probability that we know them and we can calibrate their letters. That's all it
Yeah,
comes down to. If we can calibrate their letters, then we know how to value the letters, and hopefully it'll be useful. Smaller
sure,
companies, it's going to be more difficult because
sure.
their sample set is smaller, our sample set is smaller, the probability of calibration is really low, so it's going to be less useful. Yeah,
Yeah.
but bigger companies, especially like a research institute, if you can go work with MSR India, with Venkat and some of the other folks, that would be amazing. That's huge help.
But the probability of doing that is really, really, really
Yeah,
small.
I know. I'm just saying, on one extreme. Yeah.
Right. So, quick one: are patents valuable for MS applications? A patent applied or a patent? No. Okay.
In general, probably not. Yeah.
Okay. Then Udit is coming back with a question. I think his question is slightly longer, but the question is about: would you say that getting into a PhD is tougher than getting into a master's? If yes, is it advisable to apply for a mix of master's and PhD program so that one can try and get a PhD admit later while doing their master's? I don't know, but I'll let you to answer. Yeah.
I know a lot of students go that route, particularly if they're unsure. They think it's irresponsible to go to a PhD program if they're not absolutely certain, and the master's is a stepping stone. I don't know. I think if I'm an applicant, I think that's not the best way because, yes, you can have more time to figure things out, but many master's programs are not representative of PhD programs. So you can go to a master's program, you can pay a lot of money for tuition and to do all that work, and it may give you minimal insight into what a real PhD is like, right? We treat PhD students differently because we know that we have to invest in them for 5-6 years. Master's students, within a year, they're mostly focused on classes, and then very quickly they're gone. So we can't treat them the same. So I don't think it's that valuable in that sense. And it costs you a lot of money. So I think
And
yeah,
and
I think
there's
the
so
best way to
many
do it is
different
just
types of
PhD.
there's so many different types of master's program also, right? At
Yeah,
least the ones
the
that
master's
I know
really
ours.
varies too much.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's very different, right? Like UIUC Master CS is very different from USC Master CS. So,
yeah,
so I think the question also should be. I think that's why sometimes having these conversations helps the students also, right? Because these days in my website, I have this question, Ben, that I get emails like this saying, dear Professor PK, I got admitted into university A and B, which one should I choose? That's all the emails. I mean, I don't have the context, I don't know who you are. I mean, I'm using this opportunity for students how to ask questions also, right? They send me this and I'm like, how do I answer it? Meaning, it could be the choice of whether I want to live, right? I want to live in
right.
the West
Yeah,
Coast versus East Coast. I
yeah,
can't live in snow, right? So, I mean, how do I help you make the decision, right? So, I think that context is also very important.
yeah,
CS programs and
exactly.
stuff. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. Good, good. I think I don't want to take a lot of time, Ben, but I think this was super good conversation. There are a few people who have asked multiple questions again and again. Hopefully, Dheeraj, Osad, Rahman, Udit, Puneet, all of these people who asked questions got the answer you want. Shreyas, Dheeraj, Vineet, yeah, so hopefully Varnit, all of these people got the answer you want from the person who has been doing this admissions for a long time and has been the chair in the admissions also. And hopefully it is helpful to all of you. Any final thoughts, Ben, before you drop off?
Yeah, I don't know. I think in general, the general trend in the U.S. is that we're seeing less and less Indian applicants, and I think Indian students are tending more to take the lower risk route, perhaps, of doing the masters. But in general, I think I would encourage students to apply more directly and earlier to the PhD. I think they will be surprised by how much easier it is than they think. And yeah, that's my one big sort of takeaway is I think people are being very conservative, and in the process, it sort of slows down the pipeline, hurts everybody. But I think
Yeah.
The master's is harder than you think to get in. The PhD is easier than you think to get in, and it may be better for many people, not everyone, but many people to apply directly for the PhD.
Yeah. So I think that's a general trend that I also see. Even institutes, students who work with me, generally are more inclined towards starting off with the masters and then seeing what they go. And not many people come back. Meaning, I don't remember in the last 9 years anybody who is started with the masters and then said, "Oh, few have done it," and then gotten on. But then the masters, they were paying a lot of money to get that master's degree, as you
exactly
said, and then decided to do a PhD. Right? So
that's really a high cost.
Yeah. One more quick question has come. Let's see. This question has come in the past also to me, which is applying in. So, what is a good choice to make? Applying in a specific CS program, for example, a master's in computer science, specialization in data science, versus a generic CS program, master's in CS. What would be your thoughts?
I think it really depends on the program. So some of these schools now have specialized programs in data science or AI or whatever, right? And so you need to really dig into the requirements and what that program looks like. Many of them are new. Many of them are just names for organizations that don't necessarily change anything. A lot of times you see a subset of faculty rebranding as data science or AI or something like that. So it really depends specifically on the program. I would say don't worry about it. In general, core CS should be the best way to go, because a larger program, a more established program, you'll more likely get a closer look at your application and a better decision based on your materials. A smaller program, they may have additional factors that are not obvious in their decision making, and it may be a little bit higher risk and higher variance in terms of who gets in. So if it really looks appropriate, then sure. But in general, I think I would probably lean towards the more general CS, the core CS.
But the top schools, at least the general CS, acceptance rates are pretty small, right? So the students' strategy is acceptance rates in an MS in CS is small, whereas acceptance rate in a, so to say, MS in CS in data science is high. So let me get to that institute. At least I'll have the brand with me, right, to start off with, and then we'll figure out what happens.
Maybe if there's a big difference, it may be an advantage to do that. It's not clear, but I would say look at the particular program. Yeah, if it makes sense, sure. There's no harm in it.
Yeah. Okay. Good, Ben. If nothing else, thanks for your time. I think we took 90 minutes of yours. I think I'll leave this video anyway for people listening. I'll leave this video on my timeline, and I'll thank again Ben for taking time. Thanks everyone for joining. I think
thanks PK for making this happen. So I appreciate it.
Thanks. Have a nice day then.
All right. Thanks very much, man. I'll see you later.